It's Spot the Difference Day in today's video because we are looking at the fully electric Volvo C40. Having previously reviewed the XC40, there are a few differences between the two models. Now the C40 is actually a little bit pricier, where it starts from roughly £45,000. If you want a dual motor configuration, you're going to have to go for the Plus model, and that comes in at roughly £56,000. And if you want the whole shebang with all the features included, then you're going to go for the Ultimate trim at £61,000, which we have on review. Now if you want a detailed breakdown between the trim levels, do check out our written review, which will be down in the description below and in the pinned comments. So to kick things off, I have to talk about the powertrains that are currently available, because at the time of the review of the XC40, it was only available in a dual motor configuration. Now you have got a single motor which outputs roughly 231 horsepower, and that equates to around 170 kilowatts of power. It gives you around 330 newton meters of torque. It's probably a little bit more of a sensible choice. However, if you want a little bit more fun, and like the model that we have on review, here we have got a dual motor configuration running an all-wheel drive setup, and you've got 300 kilowatts of power. That equates to 408 horsepower and gives you 660 newton meters of torque, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now here what we found is the 0 to 60 of the C40 was actually a smidge bit slower than the XC40 that we previously reviewed. Not really sure why, because the C40 should theoretically be a bit faster, given it's a bit of a crossover in comparison to a fully fledged small sized SUV like the XC40. But nevertheless, over here the C40 achieved 0 to 60 in 4.59 seconds, as opposed to the 4.51 seconds of the XC40. I know we're talking very small differences here, but regardless, both vehicles are going to leave a lot of people with a smile on their face when they put their foot down to the metal. Now the differences, however, between the two vehicles, in my opinion, feel that when it comes to cornering, see, the C40 just feels a little bit better composed. I'm not really sure if it was placebo, but I just felt a little bit more connected to the road under me, despite the vehicles operating pretty much the exact same setup. Here it just felt that when I was cornering at speed on country roads, I just felt a little bit extra connection to the front axles, and furthermore just meant that the body lean around corners was kept down to a minimum. Now don't get me wrong, in comparison to the likes of, let's say, the Tesla Model Y, which has a little bit more of a stiffened suspension setup, the XC40 and the C40 will feel like there's a bit more body roll. But frankly, over here, the best thing about it is that when you go into town, the C40 and the XC40 suspension setup really come in their own, and therefore means that you can potter in and around town, go over speed bumps, potholes or anomalies, and also go on country roads, and you'll just have a fantastic, pleasurable experience without too much rebound or body roll to worry about. Now, in order to better the experience when you're going at speed, you can enable a toggle through the infotainment system, and you can stiffen up the steering wheel. There's only a singular option, there's no sort of drive modes to choose from, and in our case we did find that adding that extra bit of stiffness means that you felt a little bbit more connected to the road. Now don't get me wrong, in terms of driver's feel, the XC40 and the C40 are no competition to the likes of the BMW iX3, which in our opinion still reigns supreme in the overall driver's feel for an all-electric SUV. Now, unlike the BMW, you don't have to enable B mode each time you step inside the cabin. See, very much like the XC40 and the Polestar 2 or the Tesla, there's a simple toggle on the infotainment system to enable one pedal drive, and that truly does mean one pedal driving. You can lift off from the accelerator pedal and come to a pretty harsh standstill, and therefore means that it takes away the stress when it comes to commuting in and around the city, because it means that you don't have to rely on pressing on the physical brake pedal. Now this brings us perfectly on to recouping energy back into the battery pack, and of course the overall range that one can achieve. Now here you have got a 78 kilowatt hour battery pack, where you've got a net usage of 75 kilowatt hour capacity, and from our mixed driving test we actually netted 230 to 250 miles, and this is because the Ultimate trim that we have on review has got the heat pump also installed. You'll find the heat pump as standard on the Plus trim as well, so therefore all the all-wheel drive and therefore twin motor Volvo XC40 and C40s have a heat pump. But if you're going for the core, it's just worth bearing in mind that the heat pump is not included unless you go for the more expensive trims. Now here what we'll find is that it's very much on par with the XC40, which is very much no surprise, and is somewhat comparable to a lot of its competitors. While it's not as impressive as the likes of the Tesla Model Y or in comparison to the Skoda Enyaq iV, we certainly think it will suffice for a lot of consumers, and therefore means that the range will definitely be fine when you're doing longer commutes. And better still, you have the ability to go through the infotainment system and better the experience, and we'll touch upon that very shortly. But before doing that, we have to talk about the charging speeds. And here the C40 has a maximum input of 150 kilowatts, and therefore going from 10 to 80% takes a mere 37 minutes. If you were to find a more commonly found 50 kilowatt charger, it will take around an hour, just over an hour. Now, of course, you might want to be charging at off-peak times, so for example at work or let's say at home, and if you have access to an 11 kilowatt 3-phase power supply, it means you can go from 0 to 100% in roughly 7 hours. This time goes up to around 11 hours when you're going on a regular 7 kilowatt wall box, and if you're going via 3-pin socket instead, it will take a whopping 30 to 40 hours. Now, sometimes finding an available and appropriate charge point on an EV can lead to a bit of anxiety, but thankfully that's a non-issue in the Volvo C40 because it incorporates Google's Android Automotive OS, which is absolutely fantastic. Here it reads the battery level and means that when you're doing certain routes, which are going to be very long, you can actually incorporate a charge stop on the way, and therefore means that it calculates the amount of time that it will take to charge and also the amount of time it will take to actually get to your destination, including when you are going to be stopping, which we think is a fantastic feature and one that we'd love to see incorporated in more EVs. And of course, this has been around since the inception of Tesla, but nevertheless it's great to see that Volvo is also competing in this department. Now, as for the infotainment system itself, the 9-inch portrait display is actually very responsive and also intuitively laid out, which makes for a good user experience. Despite our dislike for touch-based climate controls, we can safely say it's pretty much a non-issue on the C40 due to the fantastic fluidity of the display. Now, below it, you do also have a few physical controls, such as your controls for your media, and therefore makes for a better user experience while on the move. Now, on that note, the fully digitalized 12.3-inch instrument cluster further heightens the experience because it incorporates Google Maps and therefore allows you to see your navigation without having to glance towards the infotainment system. Now, our only complaint, however, is the fact that Volvo have not incorporated a head-up display, both as standard or indeed as an option. This would have further bettered the experience when it comes to driving because it would have meant that your eyes were fixated on the road while providing you all the key information that you need. Now, what you might also need if you're a budding audiophile is a good sound system. And here, the Volvo C40 in its ultimate trim has a 13-speaker 600-watt Harman Kardon audio system, which in our opinion is absolutely fantastic. If you want a little bit of an audio demo, do check out our XC40 audio review up on your pop-up banner because it will give you a bit of an indication of how the C40's audio system, which is identical, performs. Now, your only complaint over here is that it's only available in the ultimate trim, and as a result means that if you're going for, let's say, the Plus or the Core model, you won't be actually able to spec it up, in other words adding an option of the Harman Kardon audio system, and instead here you'll be limited to an 8-speaker system instead. Now, what we'll say here is no matter which system you go for or which trim level you go for, you'll be pleased to know that the overall cabin noise is actually kept down to a minimum. Therefore, you get a pretty serene experience. If you want a detailed breakdown in terms of the overall sound measurements that we recorded within the cabin, do check out our detailed written review that can be found down in the description below or in the pinned comments. So with the audio system out of the way, this perfectly leads us on to the in-cabin comfort. And here the C40, as standard on all trim levels, incorporates a fixed panoramic glass roof, which isn't the same that could be said about the XC40, which instead in its more expensive trim levels incorporates a glass roof and a sunroof with a retractable sunshade. Now, of course, it depends as to what's more important to you and in terms of which trim levels you're going for, but nevertheless, it's great to see that the C40 incorporates that fixed panoramic glass roof because it brings in a lot of additional light within the cabin, which is appreciated in a country like in the UK. It does also have UV protection, so you don't have to worry about getting a suntan while sat inside. Now this also brings us on to the seat comfort, which is very accommodating at the front and at the rear. The front two seats in the core spec are only manually adjustable, but if you want electronically operated seats, at least the front two, you'll have to go for the Plus model or above. As for your heated front and rear seats and also steering wheel, this also does come incorporated in the Plus models, and as such, if you're going for the twin motor configuration, you get this all as standard. So what about at the rear of the cabin? Well, due to the sloped roofline of the C40, it does eat away at overall headroom, and as someone who's just under 6 foot, I don't have a problem, but if you're 6'2" or 6'4", you might have to hunch down a bit. Now the same comments weren't said about the XC40, so therefore if rear occupant headroom is very important to you, then you might want to look at its sibling. Now thankfully the legroom is absolutely fantastic. I've got no problems whatsoever. I can pretty much fully extend them, and better still, due to the positioning of the seats whereby they're not diagonally wedged, it means my quad muscles are not going to be tired on longer excursions. Our only complaint here at the rear of the cabin is that the rear footwell design is not flat, or a near flat design like for example the Tesla Model Y, and this is because the transmission tunnel has been retained from its petrol or diesel models, and it's a shame here that Volvo has not optimized this space. Nevertheless, if you're not going to use the rear middle seat, you can pull down a compartment which serves as an armrest and also has two cup holders. This perfectly leads us onto storage within the cabin, and here the rear door bins are small but will suffice on smaller excursion, but we do like the fact that Volvo has incorporated small non-slip bays by each of the rear outer seats. Now towards the center console, towards the rear portion of the center console to be more specific, you've got two USB Type-C ports for charging and also the buttons to initiate the seat heaters, of course in the appropriate models. Now at the front of the cabin, the door bins are a lot larger, whereby they'll accommodate a 500ml bottle alongside a small to medium sized purse or wallet, and of course here you also have got fabric lining both at the front and at the rear, which means that if you have small loose change or keys for example, they're not going to rattle around when you're traversing uneven terrain. Now as for the center console, at the front of it you have got a wireless charging bay which comes fitted as standard. It does feel a little bit hit and miss when we were trying it with our Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, but nevertheless you can plug in a phone and therefore attain charge via the two USB Type-C ports, and then the 12-volt socket can be quite handy if you're plugging in the dash cam. If you want a list of our favorites, do check out our roundup down in the description below. Now further down the center console you've also got two cup holders, and then you have got the center armrest area which is large enough and also somewhat customizable, because you can take out a compartment, and therefore if you have certain little bit of trash or things that you want to throw away, you can put them over here and throw them away quite conveniently. However, the only complaint we have of storage within the cabin is the glove compartment, which is a little bit too small for our liking, and wish that Volvo had offered a bit more space. Now another love-hate relationship we have with the Volvo C40 is the pressure sensor that's incorporated within the driver's seat. Now this makes for a really intuitive experience when you're jumping in and out as a single occupant, because there's no start-stop button that you have to worry about. However, if you have other occupants within the vehicle, specifically at the rear, it means that as soon as the driver steps out, the infotainment system and the climate controls power down, which is not that great for those people who have small-sized families. This is the same sort of complaint that we've had with the vehicles from the Volkswagen Group, Tesla, Polestar, and also its sibling, the XC40. Alas, that's the case with this vehicle, and if you want a vehicle that does not have this feature, then you might want to look at the likes of the BMW iX3. Now of course, when it comes to storage capacity, we have to talk about its boot, and as standard you've got an electric tailgate that comes fitted on all trim levels. Now, if you want hands-free operation, you'll have to go for the Plus model or above. There's plenty of different ways of operating it. There is a button found within the cabin, you've got the remote, you've got the kick function where applicable, and then you've got a button found just above the number plate. Now when the tailgate does open up, it's got that hatchback design which makes it very easy to load in and out goods. Now I'm just under 6 foot and I'm just about fit underneath. If you're just a bit taller, you might have to duck a little bit. Nevertheless, in terms of a practicality point of view, it's got a flat loading bay which is absolutely fantastic, with a boot lip which isn't raised. Better still, here you have got an underfloor compartment storage as well, and you've got a 60-40 split with a ski latch as well, which makes it great for taking elongated goods. Now in the ultimate trim, when you drop the rear seats, you've also got electronically foldable headrests, which just makes it a little bit easier when you're popping down the seats and doing it quite regularly. Now, in terms of the total capacity, you have got a little bit of a reduced space in comparison to the XC40, whereby in total here you've got 413 litres down from 452 litres, and with the seats down you've got 1,205 litres down from 1,328 litres. Now, while we think the boot capacity of the C40 will suffice for a lot of consumers, it is worth bearing in mind that it is very important to you. You might want to look at the Skoda Enyaq iV or the larger Audi e-tron, which are class leading in this department. Elsewhere, the C40, very much like the XC40, has a front storage compartment, also referred to as frunk. And here you've got 31 litres of usable storage. Now, this is not as large as the likes of the Tesla Model Y, but will suffice for your charging cables. It is worth considering, however, it's not electronically operated and therefore makes it a little bit more cumbersome to use on a day-to-day basis. Now, the C40's sloped rear roofline does affect the overall boot capacity and rear occupant space. However, it does add to the overall sportiness in comparison to its XC40 sibling. Here we particularly like the integrated spoiler and the look of the taillights, which feed well with the overall design of the vehicle. At the side, you're treated with 19-inch alloys as standard, but if you go for the ultimate trim, you'll get 20-inch alloys such as the ones pictured. We're never a fan of plastic wheel arches or side skirts, but as they don't protrude too much from the vehicle shell, we've got no major complaints. At the front, we must say that the vehicle looks very stylish and futuristic, which is the same that could be said about a lot of Volvo vehicles. Frankly, in the design point of view, we've got no complaints. We should also point out that Volvo does incorporate all of its paint choices as a free option. In other words, you can change between them depending on your own personality, which isn't the same that could be said about a vast majority of its competitors. As for the ultimate trim, you also have access to the premium metallic finishes, which add to the overall pizzazz of the C40. Now, Volvo's not just known for its fantastic design language, but also in terms of its safety credentials. Now, while we can't comment about crash testing, we can talk about the driver assistance systems. And here, the C40 core model integrates cruise control with speed limiter, and you've also got the likes of lane mitigation, which by the way can be fully disabled via the infotainment system, and therefore means that each time you're stepping inside a cabin, and let's say you live on the country roads, you're not going to have to disable it each time you step inside the cabin. It's a small little complaint we have about some of its competitors. Nevertheless, it is there for you to use, and you also got City Assist, which does do exactly what it says on the tin. Now, if you want to bolster the experience, the Plus models and above offer you a great degree of driver assistance systems, and we absolutely love the adaptive cruise control with speed limiter and the pilot assist. Now, the combination means that it takes the stress away when you're on the motorway. You can just enable it by a touch of a button through the steering wheel, and it means that it does the steering, it also does the distance from the leading vehicle, and it also integrates stop and go technology, which is just absolutely phenomenal. And it's something that you can also trust, because we found that it regulates the speed and the distance really well, and furthermore rivals the best systems out there on the market, such as the ones offered from BMW and Tesla. Now, you do also have blind spot monitoring system and rear cross traffic alert, which therefore takes the stress away when you're reversing into a kind of blind corner and you might have not seen it, and here it incorporates the cameras in order to alert you. Now, this does also bring us onto visibility. Now, here the C40 is not as good as its sibling, the XC40, and that's specifically to do with the rear. Now, the front and the side got no complaints whatsoever, but the rear, the C40's window is quite small, and therefore means that when you're peering over your shoulder, you're going to see very little. Now, you do have rear parking sensors that come fitted as standard, but it's a shame not to see a rear view camera. Given the C40's limited visibility, one would have thought the automaker would have included this. If you do want a rear view camera, in fact, if you want 360-degree cameras and front parking sensors, you're going to have to go for the Plus model or above, which do integrate all of this, and therefore means that if you do come to doing complex parking maneuvers, the C40 is going to be a breeze in this department. So with all of that in mind, it brings us onto our verdict, and hopefully we've made it clear throughout this review that the C40 is very similar to the XC40. However, the latter has got better rear occupant headroom and also boot capacity. It also comes in at a little bit of a cheaper cheaper price tag. Now the C40 on the other hand has got a bit better driving dynamics and also incorporates a fixed panoramic glass roof as standard on all trim levels, which isn't the same that could be said on the lower trim levels of the XC40. Frankly, between the two, we think the XC40 will be the more popular choice, but there's still a market for the C40, and we still love its inclusion in the market and think it's a fantastic alternative to what else you can find. As such, it gets our Best Buy awards. Now, I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts of the vehicle down in the comment section below and how you think it compares to its sibling and the rivals out there, such as the Audi Q4 e-tron, the Mercedes EQA, or for example, the Tesla Model Y. If you've liked this independent detailed review, definitely do drop a like, subscribe and hit that bell notification. If you've done that already, we just want to thank you in advance. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.